Alright, so while we're still waiting for some award season movies to come out, we might as well get this out of the way. Because I like to think we're pretty much done with the really bad movies that came out this year. And obviously, I did a count. It's around 240 movies that I saw from this year. And I didn't do reviews for all of them, but most of them, a very, very large fraction of them. But I didn't, just because there were so many and it was happening, a bunch of stuff was happening so much at a time. I missed reviewing pretty much all the Netflix movies, with the exception of saying something here and there about Mudbound and maybe another one. Um, and obviously here, there are three movies on here that I didn't do actual reviews for, so I'm hoping I can just blow through these quite quickly, because if you want any further elaboration, they're out there. You'll also notice that there are probably some things that I didn't talk about that I have seen that you would think would be contenders for something like this, kind of like Charlie Sheen's 9/11 movie. That's not to say that that movie isn't a bit of a disgrace just for existing, but weirdly enough, the fact that it exists is kind of its biggest problem, because as a movie by itself, it's probably not as bad as you're thinking, and certainly not as bad as it might sound. It's definitely mostly the feeling of insensitivity around it that has given it the reputation that it has. And I suppose that's for good reason, but, so in case you're looking for something like that, that's why it's not quite here. So I'm gonna probably go ahead and do the thing we usually do, where there's an honorable mention and then we have the 10. So let's try to get through this quickly. The honorable mention, because it's, I guess, such an easy target, is The Snowman. What's really to say about The Snowman has been said already. Before the movie even came out, Thomas Albertson was coming out saying, "Hey guys, this is what went wrong. Sorry." It was out of our hands. Where it's very poorly put together. We clearly had two different editors doing two completely different things. It seems like there are scenes that weren't even able to be shot in time, so there are just missing pieces that you can so clearly tell nobody knew what the fuck they were doing when they made this. You've got dubbed Val Kilmer. You've got this, like, around every turn in this movie there is something wrong, which sucks because it seems like there's a coherent movie in there. There was a coherent movie to be made, but just everything at every possible turn went wrong. And regardless of the nice cast list you got here going on, one of the weirdest subplots in the movie is J.K. Simmons doing God knows what, taking pictures of women's tits for some reason. And it's just nothing adds up whatsoever, making it completely devoid of suspense, devoid of intrigue, just anything whatsoever. So that's kind of a bummer. But to be honest, I actually feel like it could be worse. But like maybe 10 more movies that are worse, quite actually. So let's go into this. My number 10, once again, is going to be a pretty easy choice. The Bye Bye Man. One of our January horror movies from this year. It honestly feels like it wasn't that long ago we saw this. This year kind of blew by, but yes. For starters, it's really nice that Doug Jones was able to kind of cap his year off with The Shape of Water, given that he started it with this. So, that's... but in the meantime, we have here, it's just yet another teenage horror movie. We've got all the cliche characters. We've got all the cliche scares. It's got that... It's them basically drowning in teenager dialogue, despite it's so clearly written by an adult writer that is completely detached from such a group. There are scenes that they seem like they're scare scenes, and like maybe they'd be effective in another movie if they had a better execution. But it's like they came up with these scenes but had no real context to put them in, so they're just thrown into this movie with no clear much of anything. And obviously it got really famous for its really stupid name and its really stupid concept that you really can't do a whole lot with. It's like an entire plot revolving around the moment in Ghostbusters when Gozer says the first thing you think of is gonna kill you, and they have to not think of anything. That's like the whole concept of the whole movie, and it doesn't work that way. um, and it's also a movie that seems to get off on humiliating its actors. It's not necessarily that these actors are bad, but the movie they're in, the things they have to say, the things they have to do, particularly that seance scene, it's just like they intentionally tortured the actors and tried to embarrass them as much as they possibly could, and that's just cruel. Um, and despite all this stupidity, it's like you would think it would take a special kind of stupidity to come up with a movie like this, but still, everything still feels derivative, despite that. So it's like, how much worse can you get? Well, uh, let's go to number 9. Number 9 is a movie I did not review, but I picked it up from the library, unfortunately. And that movie was The Layover. You might have possibly heard of The Layover strictly because they plastered Alexander Daddario and Kate Upton on the cover for Eye Candy. And yeah, they are the main characters, but it's kind of like Alexander Daddario and Kate Upton. Yes, actress extraordinaires, I'm sure. I'm sure that's the reason they're the stars of this movie. Um, and so this is a movie where they are best friends. I think I tried to block it out of my head because I honestly didn't even think about the fact that I'd have to think about it again to do this. But anyway, so I think one of them, I think it's Kate Upton, is sex obsessed, and Alexander Daddario is like borderline virginal or something. She's not near as active as Kate Upton's character. Um, so there's a hurricane coming and they get stuck in an airport. Only trouble is they both meet a guy there, and even though they're best friends, it basically becomes them fighting over this guy. It's like a really idiotic, completely unfunny, completely uninspired Dumb and Dumber in one location. And it's, even if that sounds appealing to you, I promise you it's not. And when the way they fight over this guy, the way they just completely stab each other in the back over and over again, yet despite we're still supposed to do the whole, oh, they're happy friends all the time. They keep making up even though they're so shitty to each other. And it's like, the way they fight over this guy and the things they do to try to get back at each other and win his approval, which really, and he's just this bland-ass dude. He's the bland-ass dude you'd expect. I think I looked him up. He was in, like, a straight-to-video American Pie movie. He's that kind of, you know exactly, you got the image right in your head now, right? This is what they're fighting over. And lying to each other over, and putting each other in horrible situations over. This is yet another movie where somebody ends up in a dirty gas station bathroom and ends up covered in shit. Yes, this is a somebody ends up covered in shit movie. So, they go around and they're doing their eye candy thing for the most part, and then that's when you realize it's like, this is a year that's supposed to be like this big turning point. Like, you got people like Weinstein going down, you got people like Greta Gerwig possibly getting a Best Director nomination, you've got Wonder Woman coming out, and it's like, this movie takes all that stuff and knocks down the progress women have made in movies so incredibly far. Women should find this movie absolutely insulting, and I really hope they do. I don't think it got a good reception, but I also don't think anybody saw it, so I don't know what the real feedback is. But, this is just worth, and they do the whole, this is one of those movies where, like, every single contrivance you can see coming from a million miles away. There's a subplot where even though they're both fighting over this dude, there's a guy that, like, works at a jewelry store that likes one of them. I think it's Kate Upton. And so we're like, well, none of them should end up with anybody because they're pieces of shit to each other and other people. But you have to do the plot where there's the one guy that kind of wants to win her love, but all she's doing is banging the other dude and screwing her friend over, and her friend is also banging the dude, and it's this horrible triangle of fucked up shitty-ass people. But sure enough, we're going to have the sweet subplot later where she realizes the other guy likes her, and everybody gets to be happy at the end, and it's like, what in the fuck did you come? How did you come to that conclusion when you watched these people do all of this for a straight hour and a half? I think it's longer than an hour and a half. I think it's like an hour 40 something. And it's one of those movies where it's trying so desperately. You can already tell just by the casting of the two leads. It's a movie that's desperately trying to be raunchy and try to get that, like, college crowd or something, where, like, just a little bit of cleavage is supposed to make everybody get all fucking crazy and have their fucking dicks in their hands. And so, it's one of those movies also where it seems, it wants so badly to be raunchy, but it's one of those movies where it's like, the sex scenes are, like, really over the top, and it's like, they're in bed, but they're, like, this far away from each other, just, like, humping the air. And they're supposed to be, and it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing for everybody involved. You know who it's especially embarrassing for? William H. Macy directed this. I swear to God. The last movie William H. Macy directed before this was Rudderless, which was a great, great drama, a big emotional drama starring Billy Crudup. It's really good. Him and Anton Yelchin were in that, and that was really good. I don't know what bet he lost. I don't know what drugs he was on. I know nothing about how this movie was in his hands and ended up like this. But I don't know what he could have done with this script. There's nothing. I have no idea. I've got no idea. That's just confusing. And it's only going to get more confusing the more you think about it, so we should probably just move on. My number 8 is a movie that was actually quite well liked, so sorry. My number 8 is Better Watch Out. I really hated this thing. We're doing this thing now where, like, every year there's at least a few horror movies. Horror movies are getting, like, absolute bottom of the barrel. Just look at the Bye Bye Man. But then every year, because of this, there are a few horror movies that thrive because they're a little bit above average to a lot of people. So they're put up on this big pedestal, and a big, huge deal is made out of them. And this year, Better Watch Out seemed to be one of those, where it's like they try to do different things, like what It Follows was doing, or what The Babadook was doing. Kind of. Ask other people, don't ask me. And what has happened here is they seem to think I think they're supposedly turning some cliches around, like turning expectations and making something that audiences totally aren't expecting when they see this. I don't know. And like I said when I reviewed it, I think the story turn that happens like 15 minutes in is supposed to be some big surprise. Like, the marketing seems to be hiding it. But assuming you're not aware, and you don't really consider this a spoiler because it's literally the damn plot, we think something is going to go wrong and they're being stalked when a boy, Levi Miller, who played Pan in Pan, Joe Wright's Pan, is being babysat. And he and his babysitter are terrorized, but then it turns out it's actually him and his friend that are terrorizing her because he wants to have illegal sex with her because he's 12 years old. And it turns out that he's a complete Macaulay Culkin and the Good Son psychopath. Patton McCormick and the Bad Seed type. And this movie seems to think that this is new. Only they're adding vulgarity that sounds like a child who was just given clearance to curse for the first time wrote this. And they add in some graphic violence just because. The most talked about scene is this is what would really happen to the paint cans in Home Alone. They would basically blow a dude's head off. And I guess it's supposed to be really clever or something, but no. And it's not helped at all by the fact that the performances are dreadful. I know Levi Miller's young still, and he's still got plenty of time to grow as an actor, but this is easily one of the worst performances of the year, which makes the entire movie totally unbearable. To the point that I really wasn't sure if it was supposed to be, like, a parody of the bad acting in other horror movies. Like, I couldn't tell for a lot of the movie if it was supposed to be parody or straight horror. And I'm still not completely sure. It plays itself up really serious once it gets close to the end, but then still tries to play up this whole... The ending is very similar to the ending of The Guest. To give you an idea of how all over the fucking place the tone is. But I mean, at least The Guest did it relatively well. But yeah, it seems like everything in this movie that fails could easily be covered up by somebody defending it by saying, oh, well, it's actually supposed to be the opposite of what it looks like. But either way, if you look at it from either way, it just doesn't work for me at all, and really, it gets worse as it goes, too. And I got tired of it pretty fast, but it kept going. At least it's short, but it sure as shit doesn't feel like it. So I'm really not sure what it was that people really latched onto with this of all the movies out there this year. But people really like this one, but it could not fucking end sooner for me. I think another movie that was kind of actually relatively well liked that I can't stand, that's also kind of in the middle ground comedy horror section here, is a Netflix movie. My number 7 is Little Evil. This had a lot of hype behind it because Eli Craig made it. He's the guy that did Tucker and Dale versus Evil. He's also Sally Field's kid, and she's actually in this one. Instead of making this movie with him, she should have read the script and then turned him over her fucking knee. But what they're doing here is what's set up to be... this movie's so damn confused. It has no idea what the fuck it's doing. But it seems to mostly be... like 90% of it is a parody of The Omen. Yet it's playing it like it's its own thing, even though it's clearly set up to be like a comedic version of the scenario, with Sally Field doing the Mrs. Baylock type, I think. And there's embarrassing characters left and right. He's got a little friend group. Then there is Bridget Everett, who was so good in Patty Cakes, just embarrasses the fuck out of herself every time she's on screen. And then, obviously, we got bland-ass Adam Scott as our lead. And the movie... the movie starts... This is one of those movies that starts off with what looks like the climax, and then it's going to circle back around. But the weird thing about it is, for no reason at all, it shows us a scene that's, like, in the middle of the movie as the opening. Like, it knows how just fucking bottom of the barrel it is. So it's like, well, we're going to get off to a shitty start if we don't start off with something that's going to grab the audience. So let's just pick one of the scenes out of the middle of the movie and do it then. Before we've earned it, let's go ahead and use it. And it ends up pretty much being nothing, that whole thing. Like, they build it up like it's this big thing, this big suspenseful scene, this big climatic moment, and it's fucking nothing. And it's just pushed to the side, and then we move on. And then halfway through, it actually tries to do the whole touching father-son thing, and plays it totally straight. We're supposed to find this movie heartwarming after a while, suddenly. Very, very suddenly. And it's... No, there's so much miscalculation in this, you have no idea. And then it actually tries to go back. By the time it comes back, it's been so taken over by this sudden switch into sappy land that it sticks with that for the climax as we go through. And they make it an almost action climax. You know a comedy, if that's even what you can call it, is going terribly when you introduce a monster truck in the climax. You realize that you have seen movies go in dead-end directions before, but I mean, this is another level. This is pathetic. And so no, there's nothing I like about this movie. Like, there's not even that redeeming side character. There's not that redeeming side joke that comes and goes. It's just all bad from beginning to end. And I'm not one of those people that thinks Tucker and Dale is some masterpiece. I think it's clever. I think it's really funny once or twice. But I mean, this is an enormous downgrade. Like, it is amazing that something as legitimately clever as Tucker and Dale, this fucking movie is the same guy. It almost seems impossible you could have such a downgrade into the clever and funny to the completely and totally idiotic and pointless. It's wild. So, moving on there. My number 6 is The Emoji Movie. Once again, very easy target. It's like, I can't imagine a worst 2017 movies list that won't have this on it. And it's not even necessarily like I've talked about before how I don't like to put movies like those shitty religious PureFlix movies on a worst of list. I don't like putting the Sharknado movies on worst of lists because their awfulness speaks for itself. And in cases like Sharknado, putting them on a list like this would be doing it a favor. And I'm not going to do that. So you would think I'd probably dismiss the Emoji Movie the same way, but the thing is, and you would think it's probably blown out of proportion, all the hate it's getting, but it really surprised me that it actually is that bad. And for a lot of the reasons you probably heard. Not just the fact that it's not funny, not just the fact that the animation looks a little cheap, and the whole, it's a corporate commercial thing, anything like that. Yeah, it's that everything just comes together, and it's like, this is everything that's wrong with movies like this. And like I said, and it's not always the case, because they can work. It's not like this subject was inherently going to be awful. People just knew. Because I didn't think the Angry Birds movie was that bad, and it's actually moderately funny. So, it wasn't... even though this movie has much less to work with its stupid concept, and the Angry Birds movie proves that something could have been done. There could have been one laugh. There could have been one touching moment. Just anything. And this movie took the easy way out with everything, starting by casting one of, if not the unfunniest person in the comedy industry, fucking T.J. Miller, as the lead character. James Corden as the high five, and everything. The voice actors are not into it at all. It feels like they're cold reading the script as their voice is being recorded. There is, well, no, I take it back. The one thing they did right was casting Stephen Wright as the, depressed whatever emoji. That's as good as it gets. And... yeah, and every joke is so... if you can even call it that, I'm still not over that fucking joke where, James Corden's high five emoji coughs up a candy corn, and there is a whole fucking scene devoted to whether or not he's gonna eat it again after he just puked it up. And, that... the writers, that is... you could tell by the way they dragged the scene out that this is them with the best they can possibly do, the best they can possibly give to this premise. And it's like, I don't know if it's trying to do Inside Out with cell phones, but yeah, that's the worst thing about it, is that you would think this is the perfect time to send out a message to where it's like, well, maybe people can still interact just fine and make connections with real people right in front of them without needing their phone and emojis and shit, because emojis are, really... I'm not going to go as extreme as to say we're destroying the English language, but we really seem to be going in a bad direction in regards to communicating with each other, and we're trying to do everything as quick and easy as possible. And it turns out that this movie encourages this, and the whole point of the movie is you can win the heart of the one you love if you just choose the right emoji. If there's that one emoji that exists, everything will come together. That's just damaging. That's harmful. You can't, because there's the thing, that's the thing we say about a lot of animated movies that aren't even trying, like the Smurfs movie they just did, or whatever, or like the Cars movies. It's like, wow, these are so pointless, but at least they're harmless. This is not a harmless movie. Projecting this shit out to children, once again, maybe I'm being a little extreme, but it's bad news, this movie. It is actually not good for anything. No, whether... not just projecting its messages on this movie, projecting this humor. It's like, what is a child who sees this, what do they think comedy is if their first grasp at it is the Emoji Movie? They're gonna think comedy sucks. This movie is gonna ruin lives. It really could. Honestly, come to think of it. If you really, really think about it that way, this movie could ruin a child's life if they see it at too young of an age, and their brain hasn't developed enough to acknowledge and say, Mom or Dad, whoever put this on, I know you put this here to distract me with the colors and shit and all that, but this sucks. This really sucks. And I don't even have to watch it that thoroughly to get that. And yeah, so that's what the Emoji Movie had to offer. Nothing but pain. So there's that. But hold on, we've got 5 more to go. Number 5 is another movie I didn't actually review. I was going to put it on that last cluster video I did, but for some reason I didn't. I think I might have just forgotten about it. But then I remembered it because it made a headline the other day. This movie is Hangman, Al Pacino's new straight-to-video 7 ripoff. And as Al Pacino descends slowly into a sleep-deprived, drunken rooster from the Deep South, he's going to team together with Karl Urban, who has not been good in a movie yet this year. And yes, I realize I'm wearing a Thor Ragnarok shirt as I say this. That included. Karl Urban had a terrible year. That, Acts of Vengeance, probably something else too. And he hit the bottom of the barrel here. And that's saying something. So this is a movie, the headline that reminded me this movie existed and that I had actually seen it was that it was yet another movie this year that reached a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes. I believe The Layover was one of those two. But Hangman actually specifically made a headline because of it. I guess to show how far Pacino's fallen before he finally makes his long-awaited movie with Scorsese. Then maybe he's just biding his time right now. It's like he feels like he has to balance out that he's going to finally work with Scorsese by making the worst movie he's made yet. And that is saying something. So, what this is it's one of those movies where we have the oh-so-clever killer, the killer that's straight out of a Steven Seagal movie, that has a little gimmick where they have, like, a letter on them, and each victim, and we're playing Hangman, or whatever the fuck. And I don't know what purpose this serves, because the whole Hangman aspect is not... He's giving us the letters. That doesn't even... This concept doesn't even fucking make sense! We're not even playing Hangman. He's just giving us the letters. But that's even beside the point. That is like the last problem this movie has. So, what's going on here is they team up with a reporter. The reporter is Brittany Snow. And Brittany Snow... Well, first off, they all have this backstory where, like, Karl Urban's... somebody was killed. I'm actually not sure if I'm confusing this with Act of Vengeance or not. I don't think so. Somebody close to them was killed. I don't fucking remember or care anymore. Once again, I wasn't even thinking about the fact that I'd actually have to talk about this when I decided to not put it in that video, because I totally forgot I was doing this one. So, they're teaming together, and it's the whole fucking thing. Their backstory pushes them to do this case because whatever. Some indirect vengeance, justice, whatever the fuck. It doesn't matter. And so while they're doing this, they team up with a reporter who's Brittany Snow. And Brittany Snow is one of those reporters that basically tags along with them and does stuff that could get her killed for no necessary reason. There's no reason whatsoever she needs to keep tagging along and keep putting her life in danger. But it's one of those cases where we know she's going to be tough because she wears a leather jacket, and she basically brushes off any criticism by saying, hey, I was nominated for a Pulitzer. There you go, that's her character. But even though she's tough, wears a leather jacket, and was nominated for a Pulitzer, would you believe me if I told you that the real reason Brittany Snow is following them around, what could it be? Could it be because the climax has to involve her getting kidnapped and they save her before it's too late? I don't know. Take a wild guess. But it continues on, and it's just so incredibly poorly made in general. There's one particularly hilarious scene when a witness that they're questioning uses a soda can to cut her arms open in a suicide attempt. She lives, okay? She lives. But the funny thing, for now, but the funny thing is that people are dying left and right in horrible graphic ways. They're being cut open, they're being sawed into, they're being hung by cables. The one guy is hung by a cable and then hit by a train. Hilarious. But all this bad shit happening, all this death, all this bloodshed, this girl's suicide attempt that she ultimately survives is treated with slow-mo and Lord of the Rings music. It's hysterical. When it's not completely dreadfully painful, it's hysterical. It's just a matter of finding which way you want to go before you lose your mind watching it. And this is what it is. And it basically, with all this shittiness aside, it's just another one of those movies where the detectives sit around and they bullshit, and instead of actually trying to solve murders, it's like they're sitting around waiting for crimes to happen. They're waiting for the bodies to pile up so they have something to do. In the meantime, they're just going to discuss their generic-ass backstories. And that's it. And it goes in all the wrong directions. It's like, it sort of has the feel of, like imagine if 88 Minutes was close, like, this movie makes 88 Minutes look like Run Lola Run. It really does. If that says anything to you. And then there is stuff, and it's just one of those movies where, like, around in every single scene somewhere you can point out something that's really fucking stupid and makes no sense and is completely against the continuity of something that came before it. They're like one of their first victims has a perfect circle carved into their chest after they've been killed. Perfect circle. Obviously, it's an O for the game, right? But then later on, they're investigating, they're looking into it, and they're like, oh man, the whole thing is uneven. This was a struggle. It's like, okay, because the first time we got to the crime scene, that was a perfect fucking circle. But this is how they didn't care. When they made this movie, they did not care whatsoever. So, and that's the thing, is I was watching this, and I was like, wow, this couldn't possibly get any worse. Who's this idiot director? And I see his name, and I was like, how in God's name does this fucking nobody make a movie with Al Pacino? I know it's this movie with Al Pacino, but still, he's still Al Pacino. How did this guy get this job? I was like, we will never see his fucking face again. Sure enough. Not necessarily that this is to say this is some big deal. But I mean, this same year, I think it was Vengeance, a Love Story, with Nicolas Cage. Same director. He got to make Hangman, but not only did he get to make Hangman, he made 2 movies this year. There's something wrong. There's something really wrong. There are filmmakers out there trying so hard to get some really quality shit made, and they can't do it. Because there's so many obstacles. The guy that made Hangman made 2 movies this year. And got both movies starred an Oscar-winning actor. It doesn't matter if it's Al Pacino in his down here days. It doesn't matter if it's Nick Cage in these days. He made these movies. I don't get it. But there it is. There's Hangman on the table for us. But we've got 4 more to go. Number 4 is a dreadful piece of shit called The Dinner. I saw it when it first came into Redbox because I was interested in it because Richard Gere and Steve Coogan were the stars of it, and Laura Linney and Rebecca Hall as well. And it's I think it's circulating on Netflix now, so I don't know who else has been horribly, whatever the opposite of graced is with its presence. So The Dinner sets itself up to be, like, basically carnage. These 2 couples, Gere and Rebecca Hall, and then Steve Coogan and Laura Linney, get together because their kids did something horrific that resulted in tragedy that is on video, and they got to figure out how they're going to take care of this, and if the kids should be punished or not. And it sets itself up like it's going to be carnage at this pretentious restaurant. When it's anything but. They're finding excuses to get up from the table. They're finding excuses to throw flashbacks at us. They're finding excuses to focus on other people. They're finding excuses to try to be like a Jean-Luc Godard movie. There's a whole scene when, like, Gere and Coogan are out and they're talking, and then suddenly, from out of fucking nowhere, the screen starts to change colors and go blurry, and Stephen Lang's voice comes on and starts explaining the Battle of Gettysburg to us. And this doesn't have anything to do with anything, I promise. I don't know where else to go from there, but, and it's one of those cases where a lot of the movie is us hearing Steve Coogan's thoughts. And much as I love Steve Coogan normally, he plays like the guy, like, every single one of his thoughts is like this, I fucking hate everybody, hipster, emo thoughts. And we have to keep listening to this. He's the kind of guy that calls people that he doesn't like apes, because they're so below him. And it's like, a lot of the movie is hearing this guy's thoughts. fucking wonderful. And this movie is 2 hours, like a full 2 hours. Not like an hour 50 something, not an hour 45, a full 2 hours. And it basically wants to, I know maybe it's trying to like show us something, like say, here are real situations, this is what happens in the real world, isn't this annoying, isn't this bad? But basically it seems like the whole point of the movie is no matter who, if you basically have money and you're a pretentious piece of shit and these are your parents, you can literally get away with murder because they will believe that you are incapable of doing no wrong just because you are their kid. You can go out and burn a homeless woman alive and videotape yourself doing it. And this movie ends with your parents saying, well, they couldn't have done that because they're my kids. Roll fucking credits. That's what the whole damn movie ultimately comes to. When it has no goddamn attention span whatsoever. And even when it ends, it just fucking ends. It just comes to somewhat of a conclusion that really doesn't close anything and just stops. It's like the one good thing you could say about the movie. It was merciful enough to just fucking end itself before it got even worse. And you take these actors. Isn't this heartbreaking? Richard Gere, Steve Coogan, Rebecca Hall, and Laura Linney. You could have had carnage with these four, and you got this. And I don't know what. And it's also kind of confusing for a while of how characters even relate to other characters and what their purposes are. But the thing is that they're also pieces of shit you don't care enough to find out, but the movie's still trying to be some kind of web of shit that's mysterious that you have to figure out, but then it's like, well, it's pretty easy to figure out once you do. There's nothing complex to it, after all. And this is a movie that seems like it was made to be hated. And that's exactly what I did. I don't know, once again, I'm not really sure what the reception is. But actually, to be honest, it wouldn't surprise me if, like, critics liked it. But no, everything about this movie is extremely unlikable. And once again, I'm sure you could throw the excuse at it that it's supposed to be. The character's supposed to be unlikable, the situation's supposed to be unbearable, whatever the fuck. But you can do that and still accomplish something. This movie doesn't accomplish shit and has no redeeming factors in it whatsoever. And I don't mean your characters or the story have to have redeeming factors. Your movie has to give you something. And we've got nothing except fucking pretension and bullshit and assholes for a non-stop 2 hours. I fucking hate it. I really, really hated this. To be honest, I kind of thought this was going to be number one for a while. But then we got 3 to go, and I might have shifted some things, rethinking again, but I can't remember exactly when I saw the fucking dinner, but I don't remember if these were later or not. So, let's go into number 3. Number 3 is The Assignment. Once again, a shame because the director is somebody worthwhile. Walter Hill, who did, like, The Warriors and 48 Hours, and even his recent Stallone movie, Bullet to the Head, I really liked. He's just like that go-to action guy, especially like 80s action, like the action that you like strive for when you see action movies today, and you're like, why don't they make those anymore? You're probably thinking of a Walter Hill movie, The Driver, and now he's made this, and this is one of those movies where, this is a movie kind of like Downsizing. This is a movie where when you hear the premise, you have to ask the person telling you if they're joking. This is a movie, if you aren't aware or didn't see when I talked about it, where Michelle Rodriguez plays a bearded male hitman that works for Anthony LaVallia. And when a hit goes south, Anthony LaVallia punishes this hitman by taking him to a doctor, Sigourney Weaver, a plastic surgeon, and having him turned into a woman. And then it's Michelle Rodriguez as Michelle Rodriguez. And so you immediately fail because it's like, they're building on this whole thing of, people think there's something like, I wouldn't, masculine is a, I don't know if it's the exact word I'd use, but there's that tough quality to Michelle Rodriguez where it's kind of like, you when you see an action movie, it's like, oh, she can totally kick the other dude's asses. And the fact that she's a woman, it doesn't matter because it's like she's right there with them. But that's the problem, is like she can be tough like that in like a one of the guys type. Michelle Rodriguez still looks like a woman, and slapping a damn beard on her is it's gonna take more effort than that. She looks like she's wearing an idiotic disguise. She looks like she's wearing the worst Halloween costume that you could find. And they fit her with like a fake dick. She has a full frontal nude scene with a fake dick and without, but with the fake dick. But that's the problem, is like when we see her from behind when she's still a man. Trust me, Michelle Rodriguez still looks very feminine, and it's like this concept is already fucking itself, but it gets weirder and dumber and so off the rails, and not in a good way. This probably sounds like the most entertainingly bad movie ever. No, it's not that kind of bad. We're talking straight bad. It's one of those movies where it's like, it's really poorly edited. It has to be edited like 5 times with flashing white lights just to watch dudes walk to a car. Yeah. And it's trying to do like this. They do think like scene transitions will be like comic book pages, when I don't know if this is in any way associated with a comic book, this story whatsoever. I have no idea. It really just feels like this cheap flourish to go in between scenes. I don't know. And nothing about it is believable. Like, she's got this very unconvincing guy voice, and even though she's been entirely turned into a woman at this point, she's sometimes, not always, but sometimes trying to keep the guy voice on when she's a woman at this point. But then if this shit isn't bad enough, and they wrap up their plot points very quickly with like half hour to go, so then they basically just start branching off into whatever the fuck whatever they come up with next. They have no plan here. But we keep branching off to Sigourney Weaver. The movie begins with Sigourney Weaver in a straitjacket being interviewed about these events. Our perspective, the eyes we're seeing the movie through from the get-go, are the surgeons. This is a movie where a hitman is transformed overnight into a woman as punishment, who goes on a killing spree because of this. And you want the person telling this story to be the fucking surgeon. I don't care if it's Sigourney Weaver. I'd much rather hear the perspective of the person that went through this. But fine, and we kind of somewhat get that clumsily through this whole video log thing she's doing, this video confession thing that's really half-assed and shoehorned into this like halfway through, when we've already set up that this perspective is from the surgeon or whatever. And they just, and every 5 minutes is something totally gratuitous. For no reason whatsoever, it's necessary to learn about, like, the fact that Sigourney Weaver might be a sex addict. It's like, who the fuck cares? What are you doing? What is this? And so this is like every bad straight-to-DVD action movie. It just happens to have this really whacked-out premise that might be, I can't speak for these people, does this not seem like it could be? There might be some fucking, communities that don't care for this setup. It's like you turn a dude into a woman unwillingly, and their response is, I'm gonna fucking murder everybody responsible for this, including indirectly. It's like, holy shit, how did this add up? How did this get made? Quite honestly, it's really hard to fathom. But let's continue, because there's 2 more. Number 2 is going to be Rough Night. Rough Night is the worst comedy of the year, which sucks because it has a decent cast. We've got Scarlett Johansson, we've got the amazing Kate McKinnon, we've got, who was it, Zoe Kravitz, I think? And then there is, what's her name, Jillian Bell, that's trying to be like a discount Melissa McCarthy or something. I don't know. But it's like she's like half discount Melissa McCarthy, half discount Amy Schumer. She's like found a middle ground here where she's ripping off both. Not that both need to be ripped off. It's just disaster. So it's yet another Bridesmaids type. That's really the whole premise. We're gonna do the Bridesmaids thing again. The end. Until they end up completely and totally copying Very Bad Things. And it just goes right in that direction. Like, it's not like, oh, this is kind of like how we watched The Hangover, and we're like, this vaguely reminds me of Very Bad Things without the murder. No, this movie just straight up goes Very Bad Things. And just says, okay, Peter Berg, we're just going to do this now. We're just going to steal this right out from under you. I said this before, I'll say it again. If Peter Berg tried to sue these people, he could probably win. Seriously. And I wish he would. So, it's just to teach them a fucking lesson. And then have them watch like 10 screenings of his movie and say, this is how you do fucked up twisted comedy right. Once again, it gets worse as it goes. It tries so damn hard to be raunchy. This is one of those areas where, like, 3 minutes in, you got, like, somebody pissing on the floor. They're constantly talking about dicks. And this is just what it is. Like, the word penis is supposed to be inherently funny every single time somebody says it. And trust me, somebody will every minute that goes by. And then there are these moments when you can see everything coming from a mile away. Where, like, they hire a stripper, and the stripper comes, but this guy is so fucking clearly not the stripper, but the comedy, the setup, the fucking premise relies on everybody being a complete and total blind dumb fuck. And they just go with this. And it's like, oh, okay, so this is the stripper, and then he fucking dies, and then we're not supposed to know what shit is coming for the rest of the movie. And then it goes into a whole bunch of horrible directions. I'm not sure which one the worst is. There's the whole side plot. There's a couple of side plots with with Scarlett Johansson's the one that's getting married. And so her fiancé has a couple of side plots here. The first one being, once again, we're trying to do this whole equality thing where it's like, they made Bridesmaids in response to The Hangover as a way to say women can be funny and raunchy too. And then we go on that, and now everybody's trying to imitate that, and a lot of the times it's poorly. Sometimes it's okay, like Girls Trip, but then you get fucking Rough Night as well. And so what we have here is we're supposedly we're taking a step back here once again, much like the layover I was just talking about, to where it's like, instead of saying, oh, we can do what they do, no, they keep it an identity thing, where one is one and one is the other, and the comedy comes from switching the two. So we have the women going out, getting strippers, getting drunk, doing drugs, being profane and vulgar, and the guys are having, like, a really quiet wine party. And it's like, okay, you're not subverting shit. You're making it worse. You're saying, yes, these are the identities, and I accept that, and so I'm gonna make comedy by just switching them, ha! And it's like, what the fuck did you accomplish doing that? And then the fiancé stuff gets worse, because he's like, oh, she's probably cheating on me or something, so I'm gonna drive to her nonstop. And how am I gonna drive to her nonstop? I'm gonna take my fucking pants off and wear a diaper while I drive to her. And this is a subplot. This is its own thing for a large duration of the movie. Yeah, it is. And so, going on, there's also, they do this other side plot with, I think it was Ty Burrell. There was the other couple, where they bring in, like, Zoe Kravitz, and just these really desperate attempts to be really raunchy and push the envelope for, like, sexual content. And it's like, it's really nothing we haven't seen before, and the stuff we have seen before did not feel this fucking desperate. And then, one of the worst cases of all, they take the brilliant mind that is Kate McKinnon, the mind that can make any shitty comedy into something worthwhile. If you ever see you have probably never seen a shitty Saturday Night Live skit that she's been in, because her presence alone will elevate it enough for you to get through it, no matter how terrible it is. And she's, like, written and played some of the best stuff that show has seen in a long time. And what did they do here? They gave her an Australian accent. And that's her character. That is the end of it. How many different characters, how many distinctive, memorable characters has she played on Saturday Night Live in her time there? And Rough Night is like, hey, I've got an idea. I know what would make Kate McKinnon hilarious. If she talks differently. How fucking dare you? How? That's just insulting. So I don't know how else I can explain this that I didn't already, but yeah, that's the gist of it. Where you say, if you don't know where your scene is going, and 9 times out of 10 you won't, just end the scene by saying the word penis and then shouting at each other frantically. And voila, you have a scene. So this movie thinks. And remember how I was just talking about the monster truck and Little Evil, where I said, you've reached the bottom of the barrel when you reach that point? Well, Rough Night does the ultimate cliche. It's like, have you ever seen a straightforward comedy in this type of vein, where the movie ends with sudden antagonists that are guys with guns that we have never met until, like, the last 15 minutes, and then guys with guns show up in a comedy? Has that ever fucking worked? Ever? Yes, there are plenty of movies. God, that goes back to Some Like It Hot. You can totally end a movie that way, but the whole movie, like, has built around it, and it comes back from the beginning. But have you ever seen a good comedy where dudes with guns show up at the very end? I'm just remembering Billy Madison. That might be about it. But God, that was Bradley Whitford and Steve Buscemi. This is... I don't know. Dean Winters might have been one of them. Or a guy that looks like Dean Winters. I can't remember. But yeah, comedy does not get this bad often. And that's... that's how I have to leave you with this. Alright, let's finish this. The last movie was one of the first movies of the year. Go figure. The worst movie I saw this year was Resident Evil, The Final Chapter. This is an insult to a franchise that wasn't good to begin with. This is how far down it goes. It still, to this day, almost a year later, baffles me that the same guy that made those other movies that weren't that great, Paul W.S. Anderson, has just completely ruined his own franchise by his own hand. Where it's like, that franchise was not particularly good. Every now and then it had good moments. Every now and then there was a decent moment in the first movie. I thought Afterlife had a handful of decent moments and memorable scenes. I still love that fucking Axeman. But, and Kim Coates, of course. But, this is like it was done by a completely different person that had never watched the series before and just went and did their own thing in the worst possible way. And the fact that it's the same guy, I think, makes it worse. And so this has got to be one of the most obnoxious movies I've ever seen. Certainly one of the loudest movies I've ever seen. And once again, I'm not one of those people that thinks, movies are, like, too loud these days. Like, it's happened before, certainly. But I'm not somebody that's really that sensitive to that kind of thing. But, I mean... Like, I can watch a Transformers movie in a theater, and I can't say I'd be fine, because it's a Transformers movie, but sound-wise, it's like, I can take it. It's just boring to me, the action. It's not overpowering. It's not like it's assaulting me, and I'm saying it's too loud. But this movie, I legitimately thought I was going to go deaf watching this. I almost had to step outside because it physically hurt. I heard this was a criticism back when 13 Ghosts was in theaters. I wonder if it was this bad, though, because in this movie, it's constant. Like, you talk about everything that's bad in movies these days. Action scenes that are cut too heavily, action scenes that are way too close, and a horror aspect that's nothing but things jumping out and screaming at you. And this movie is all of those things, its entire runtime. There is no break from it. The whole movie is everything that's wrong with movies today. From a technical standpoint, especially. Not to mention the idea of never ending a franchise that's long since been dead. That's been dead longer than the fucking characters in it that keep fucking coming back. And it's like, even though this is the final chapter, Paul W.S. Anderson says he's done, it's one of those movies that just cannot help itself. It cannot help it. It's like, we'll end this, we'll end this, we'll end this, we'll do one big thing that brings everything full circle. There's definitely some continuity errors here, even though they're my fucking movies. I've been telling the whole story. I'm gonna fuck this shit up because I can't even remember, because I don't give a fuck anymore, as you can clearly see on the screen. And it's this, and somehow it finds, and it's like, so we're done now. We're done now. The final chapter. We're calling it this. And once again, I know Friday the 13th Part 4 was called the final chapter when there's like fucking 11 Friday the 13th movies. But still, it's like, in every single aspect of this movie, you can point out a billion movies that do that same thing, and you hate those movies for it. And this movie wanted to give you the whole package in one. It was like a highlight. Like, what would you say is the opposite of a highlight reel? That's what this is. Where it's like, hey, you know, if instead of making a worst of the year list, I could have just said, see Resident Evil the final chapter. All that shit happens in all the bad movies. And this movie took all that and amplifies it in a way we have never seen. Like, those movies that did all this bad stuff, they don't know the half of making a bad movie, because this took it to a whole other fucking level. And the thing about it, too, is that it's not even, like, that's the thing, like, it might seem like that's my main complaint, is this movie's just obnoxious as fuck, and just beats you and assaults you physically. You could probably say mentally, too, because, I mean, how is this stimulating in any way whatsoever? Which brings me to my other point, which is really weird. And it's not something I particularly want to think about too much, but, you know, how it goes. Apparently, you know how there are those people out there, those really kind of... contrarian is an easy word to throw out, but I don't know what else to call them. Those people that seem to always find the good in the stuff that is unanimously considered shitty. Where it's like, they seem to have looked for some artfulness in something that is so clearly a piece of shit. And once again, I'm not to say that thinking your opinions of movies are objective. Obviously, people will see what they see. But apparently this is one of those movies where... it overall seems to have a bad reputation, but because of this, apparently it's got some art house following now, where they see it as this, like, masterpiece. They're, like, fucking writing college papers on it. At this point, this movie is making me question those people, because in any other case, regardless of how I feel about things that I hate that are loved by a certain crowd, particularly movies like Haneke movies or Godard movies, where it's like, I think most of their movies are pieces of shit, but when I hear people describe them and talk about them at length, and I understand their significance in film history and all that, it's like, it can make you easily learn to say, that's that person's opinion. It baffles me, but they can have that. This following that Resident Evil the final chapter is getting is making me question all of this, and that's a bad place to be in. You should not be in a place where you're questioning if people are sincere in their opinions. You should just let people think what they're going to think and let it go. Because if they say all this and to a point where they write papers on it, they've got to have a connection to it. But watching this movie get that following is making me rethink all this and say, I think these people are just fucking with us now. There is no possible way there is anything fucking artful about this movie. It is totally and completely devoid of any meaning or purpose or anything, except it could be used for legitimate torture methods. It really could be. So, I'm going to take a step back now that this has happened and kind of come back to the whole, there are people that appreciate this movie. They exist, and I'm happy for them that they found something. But, I mean, this movie took me to a place to where I just feel so bitter about everything this movie stands for, or doesn't stand for, I don't fucking know. And it's and just anything, any idea like that is just so incredibly foreign to me. I would watch the filmographies of Hannah Ganger over and over and over again before I'd ever lay eyes on this one more time. Because much as I hate, Hannah Ganger movies or whatever, it's clear they have a purpose. And there's an art to them that many people have seen, and they're certainly coming from a place, whatever that place may be. I will never... This is not... No. It's just gone. It's just a blank space to me, trying to figure that out. Trying to see this movie from a positive perspective. I just literally cannot take myself there. There is nothing. This movie is a dark void of nothing to me. I don't know. But this... I don't know. I don't even know what the fuck I'm saying anymore. How the fuck did I get to Hannah Ganger from talking about this? I don't know, but that's where I lie with that. So, yes, hopefully that's the end of bad movies for this year. Obviously, we only have, 3 more days of this year left, but to me, the year is not over until the Oscar season, so we've still got, 2 more months, and because we'll be seeing awards movies, still discussing movies from this year. I will try to do... I would like to think... we got Molly's Game and The Shape of Water potentially coming. I hope the Florida Project comes back soon. And then The Post comes out on the 12th. I would like to think maybe close to the time of The Post, I will have seen everything significant and can do a best of list. And we'll see where we lie with that once all the potential contenders for such a list have been seen. So... yeah, so tomorrow you'll see we're doing the Globes thing, and then the Critics' Choice at some point, so get back into the good stuff, except I, Tonya. I actually toyed with the idea of putting I, Tonya in here, but number one, I thought it would have maybe come off too much like I'm trying to be edgy by putting an awards movie in the bottom of the year list, and secondly, where it's like, yeah, I hated I, Tonya, but probably not as much as I hated these, so... So, yeah, that's what we have for now. I guess whatever good comes out of next year, we're also going to have another one of these next year, so it'll be hard to top some of the badness that we reached this year, but I'm sure 2018 will find a way. Every year does, so... until then, let's hang this up. So, yeah, that's